I'm Claire Thompson, and my father thinks becoming a doctor is a disgrace. On the night I told him I wanted to study medicine, he didn't just laugh, he disowned me. But what he didn't know was that humiliation would be the fire I needed to prove him wrong. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. I used to think family meant protection. That was before the night my father slammed his fist on the table and said I was dead to him. We were in the kitchen of our Austin home, spotless, stainless steel everything. The kind of place that looked like no one ever really lived in it. My mother stood stiff as a statue near the window, her eyes on the dark backyard. I was 19, clutching the edges of a college brochure like it could shield me from what was coming. "I've made my decision," I said quietly. "I'm going to med school." The silence that followed was short, brutal. My father, Gerald Thompson, senior partner of Thompson and Crane, set down his wineglass with a precise clink. Then his voice, low and cold, cut through the air like glass. "If you choose medicine, don't expect a cent from me. You'll disgrace the family firm." The words hit harder than I expected. Not because I didn't think he meant them, but because part of me had still hoped, naively, that maybe, just maybe, he'd see how much this meant to me. I opened my mouth to speak, but what came out was something closer to a sob. "But I want to save lives, not chase lawsuits." His face twisted. "You want to be a nurse?" "No," I shook my head. "A doctor." That's when he stood, not slowly, not thoughtfully. He stood like a man whose authority had just been spit on. He slammed his fist on the marble counter, making a wine bottle topple and roll. "You think this is noble?" he hissed. "You think running around hospitals with blood under your nails is more respectable than defending CEOs? You're not going to med school. Not with my name, not with my money." I turned to my mother, searching for any sign of support. Her lips trembled, but she didn't speak. Of course she didn't. I'd spent my life watching her shrink in his shadow, and somehow I'd convinced myself she might make an exception. For me. But silence, it turns out, can be the loudest betrayal of all. I grabbed my backpack. "Find my own way," I said, my voice breaking halfway through. "With or without your name." He laughed, mocking, slow. "Don't come crawling back when you're drowning in debt and regret." That laugh followed me up the stairs. I slammed my bedroom door so hard the frame rattled, and then I locked it and collapsed onto the carpet, sobbing into a pillow that still smelled like childhood. There are moments in life that draw a hard line through time. Before. After. That night was mine. Before, I was Gerald Thompson's daughter. Valedictorian. Law school bound. Polished and presentable and everything he'd raised me to be. After, I was no one. Just a girl with a dream she wasn't allowed to have. I stared at my bedroom ceiling, the air thick with humiliation and grief, and whispered to myself, "This isn't the end, it's the beginning." But I didn't believe it yet. The morning after he disowned me, the house felt colder. Not just quiet, cold. Like the walls themselves had decided I didn't belong there anymore. I barely slept. I'd cried myself into a headache, then lay awake watching the sky shift from pitch black to pale blue. I knew what I had to do, but knowing doesn't make it easier. I waited until I heard the front door slam, Dad's usual 6:45 a.m. departure. Then I slipped downstairs with a duffel bag and a single plan: get out before I changed my mind. I didn't take much, a few clothes, my notebooks. And one thing he hadn't known I still had, my grandmother's letter. It was buried in the back of my closet, inside a wooden keepsake box that smelled faintly of lavender and dust. She'd passed away 3 years earlier, but her presence never really left. When I unfolded the note, written in that elegant, looping script, I could hear her voice. "Claire Bear, life will ask you to be small. Be big anyway. If your heart pulls you in a direction, follow it, even if no one else understands, especially then." I pressed the letter to my chest and cried. Not with shame this time, but something fiercer. Determination. By noon, I was on a bus to San Antonio. No plan, no welcome party. Just my grandma's small inheritance check tucked deep into my wallet and a pre-med program that had accepted me months ago, quietly, without telling anyone. I used her money to pay the first semester's tuition. And for the first time in my life, I exhaled. It wasn't glamorous. The dorm room was barely big enough for a twin bed and a desk. The walls were beige, the floor creaked, and the communal bathrooms smelled like bleach and cheap shampoo. But it was mine. Nobody raised their voice in that room. Nobody barked orders or made me feel like a failure for wanting to help people instead of sue them. I sat cross-legged on my mattress that night, unpacking the few things I owned, when my new roommate walked in. She was tall with a buzz cut and a t-shirt that read "Your trauma is valid" in sparkly lettering. "You must be Claire," she said, smiling like she wasn't just tolerating me. "Yeah," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Sorry it looks like a bomb went off in here," she shrugged. "This place always looks like that. I'm Willow, future social worker/anxious extrovert." I smiled. "Future doctor/recently disowned." "Oof." She dropped her backpack on the opposite bed. "Parent drama." "Something like that," I said softly. "He thinks I'm ruining the family legacy." "Sounds like your dad's allergic to growth." I laughed, actually laughed, and some of the tension started to melt. Later that night, as we brushed our teeth side by side like we'd known each other longer than 3 hours, Willow asked, "So what made you want to be a doctor?" I hesitated, then pulled out my grandma's letter, now folded carefully in my pocket. She believed in me before anyone else did. And she had this heart condition, spent more time in hospitals than anywhere else her last year. I hated feeling helpless. I want to be the kind of doctor that doesn't just fix bodies, but gives people hope. Willow gave me a look I wasn't used to. Not pity, not judgment, respect. "That's a damn good reason," she said. I fell asleep that night to the soft buzz of a ceiling fan and the unfamiliar comfort of knowing I didn't have to pretend to be someone else anymore. The next few weeks were a blur of lectures, cheap coffee, and emails from the financial office reminding me that scholarship funds didn't cover everything. But for once, I didn't feel like I was surviving someone else's life. I was building my own. One evening, while walking back from class with a physics textbook that felt heavier than my guilt, I glanced up at the pink-streaked sky and whispered to no one in particular, "I'm not sure how, but I'm doing this." I didn't know then how much harder it would get, or how beautiful, but in that moment, sweaty, broke, and terrified, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: pride. They say college is where you find yourself. For me, it was where I found exhaustion, ramen noodles, and a new kind of family. By the time spring rolled around, I was juggling 12-hour class weeks, labs that always ran over, and 2 part-time jobs, one at a campus cafe, the other cleaning exam rooms at a walk-in clinic on weekends. Sleep became optional. Stress was a constant hum under my skin. And then something shifted. It started with a flyer thumbtacked crookedly to the bulletin board outside the student union. Live-in assistant needed disability support program. Free room, meals, and stipend in exchange for weekday support. I almost walked past it, but something about the words "free room" and "meals" made me stop. 3 interviews and 1 background check later, I was standing at the gates of Green Oaks Academy, a boarding school nestled just outside the city for children with developmental and physical disabilities. The school was quiet when I arrived. A soft spring breeze stirred the trees lining the campus walkways. My new supervisor, Mrs. Elaine Garza, a no-nonsense woman with thick glasses and kind eyes, gave me a tour that felt more like an invitation than an inspection. "You'll be staying in the North Dorm," she explained. "Mostly kids with sensory processing disorders and a few who are nonverbal. If you don't know sign language, you'll want to learn quickly." That night, I Googled basic ASL videos until my fingers cramped. I didn't expect it to change me, but it did. Every morning, I helped the students with breakfast, learned to navigate their routines, their rhythms, their silences. I discovered that connection didn't require words, just patience, kindness, showing up. It was in that silent world where I met Jonah. He was the music teacher, tall, with kind eyes and a worn denim jacket covered in little enamel pins. I noticed him first because of how gentle he was when he tuned the school's battered upright piano, like the thing had feelings. Our first real interaction happened in the cafeteria over a spilled cup of juice. I had just helped Kira, one of the younger girls with cochlear implants, settle with her tray when a crash echoed behind me. A paper cup rolled toward my foot. "Sorry," came a soft voice behind me. "I didn't see the edge of the tray." I turned and saw Jonah crouched, trying to mop up juice with a napkin. His hand was already sticky. "I've got it," I said, kneeling down to help. He glanced up and gave a small, sheepish smile. Then, without saying a word, he signed, "Nice to meet you." I blinked, surprised. "Wait, do you sign?" He nodded, a little, "I'm still learning, like you." My face flushed. He smiled wider. "Your name?" he asked, voicing the question, but signing it too. I signed back a bit clumsily. "Claire." "Jonah," he replied, extending a sticky hand before laughing. "Maybe after I wash this off." Later that day, I caught him helping a student named Elijah, who refused to enter the music room unless someone played the same chord 3 times on the piano first. Jonah obliged without complaint. I couldn't stop watching him. That night, back in my little room tucked behind the dorm kitchen, I found myself smiling for no reason. Willow called around midnight. "How's dorm life treating you, Dr. Thompson?" I laid back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. "Honestly, it's messy, beautiful, humbling." There was a pause. "And there's a guy," I admitted. Willow squealed so loudly I had to pull the phone away. "Oh no," she said with a grin in her voice. "We're in trouble." It wasn't romantic. Not yet. But the next time I saw Jonah, he signed coffee, and I signed back, "I'd like that." Money has a way of making people uncomfortable, especially when you don't have it. I was down to $15.42 when I opened the fridge that Thursday night and found exactly 1 egg and half a jar of peanut butter. Payday wasn't for another week, and I'd already skipped buying textbooks this semester just to make rent. The dorm stipend helped, but med school had a way of eating up everything. Your time, your sleep, your savings. That night, I sat in the laundry room folding uniforms in silence. My phone buzzed beside me with a message from Willow. "Call me if you're spiraling, or if you need me to Venmo you for emergency noodles." I smiled, but didn't reply. I didn't want pity. I wanted independence. That's what made Jonah's envelope feel like a slap. It was the end of the week. The sun had just started dipping below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the campus lawn, where I found him sitting under the old sycamore near the music hall. He stood when he saw me, hands stuffed in his pockets, an odd, unreadable look on his face. "Hey," I said, setting my bag down beside him. "You okay?" He nodded slowly, then pulled a sealed envelope from his coat. "I need to give you this," he said quietly. I took it, confused. It was thick, too thick. "What is it?" "I want you to think of it as a loan," he said quickly. "Not charity, never charity, just something to keep you from drowning." My heart dropped. I knew what was inside even before I opened it. "Jonah," he shook his head. "Before you say anything, just hear me. I've watched you stretch yourself so thin you barely breathe. You work harder than anyone I know, and I also know you'll walk away from this program before you ask for help." I stared at the envelope. My chest tightened. "How did you even?" "Mrs. Garza mentioned your clinic job, that you'd been coming in exhausted. I asked around." I swallowed hard. The inside of my throat burned. "This isn't your responsibility." "I know." He stepped closer, voice soft. "But maybe I care anyway." I opened the envelope with trembling hands. It wasn't a fortune, just enough to get through a few months, enough to keep the lights on, to buy groceries without guilt, to stop choosing between lab fees and laundry soap. I looked up at him, tears springing uninvited to my eyes. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll take it," he said gently. "And when you're a big deal doctor someday, you can pay it forward." I couldn't help it. I laughed, then cried, and before I knew what I was doing, I threw my arms around him. He froze just for a second, then wrapped me in the kind of hug that didn't feel performative or awkward, but like coming home. Safe, solid. I pulled back just enough to look up at him. "No one's ever believed in me like you do." He smiled, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's their loss." That night, I moved out of my crumbling off-campus sublet and into a tiny, sunlit studio closer to the hospital. I bought groceries without calculating every cent. I bought myself a used white coat from a second-hand shop, too big but symbolic. A promise. Willow came down to visit the next weekend and walked in with a pizza and a huge grin. "Well, look at you," she said, surveying my single lamp and floor mattress. "Miss Independent with a view of the dumpster. I love it." I grinned. "It's freedom." Later, as we sipped cheap wine out of chipped mugs, she asked about Jonah. "You like him?" she said, not as a question. I shrugged, smiling. I trust him. Same thing, she said. Maybe better. There's a particular kind of joy that comes after a long season of barely surviving. Mine came in the form of an email. It arrived on a rainy Wednesday, just as I was hunched over a textbook at the campus library, nursing my third coffee and wondering how long I could function without blinking. I almost ignored it, just another notification in a sea of academic spam. But the subject line caught me, Mercy General Internship Acceptance. For a second, I just stared at the screen. I read the words twice, 3 times. Then I blinked, let out a shaky breath, and read them again. I'd been accepted. Mercy General. The hospital everyone wanted. The hospital my grandmother had been treated in during her final year. The one where I first felt the stirrings of something that looked like purpose. I burst out laughing, right there between the rows of books. A startled student at the next table looked up, confused. I didn't care. I packed my things in a daze and ran through the drizzle straight to the music hall. Jonah was at the piano, humming quietly as he played something soft and steady. When he saw me, he smiled, but paused when he saw the expression on my face. "What happened?" he asked, standing. I held up my phone, screen glowing with the email. "I got it," I whispered, breathless. "Mercy, I got the internship." He stared for a second, then broke into a grin so wide it made my cheeks ache just to see it. "No way," he said, lifting me off the ground in a spin before I could even react. I laughed into his shoulder, the rainwater from my coat soaking into his shirt. "You're getting drenched," I said. "You're worth the laundry," he replied. That night we made homemade pizza in my tiny kitchen. Well, homemade was a generous term. We burnt the crust and spilled half the toppings on the floor, but it didn't matter. It was one of those rare nights where everything felt light. "I'm halfway to the white coat," I told him as we sat cross-legged on the floor, eating out of the baking pan. Jonah leaned back on his elbows and smirked. "I expect to be the first person you wear it for." I glanced at him, my face warm. "Promise." He nodded solemnly. "I'll hold you to that." The internship started the following week. Long hours, constant learning curves, real patience, real stakes. I shadowed cardiologists, took notes like my life depended on it, and stayed until the last nurse clocked out. I couldn't get enough of it. The smells, the adrenaline, the soft murmurs of monitors in the ICU. It felt like stepping into the version of myself I'd always been trying to reach. One day, during a break in the staff lounge, a senior resident named Dr. Patel leaned over to me and said, "You've got good instincts. You listen first. That matters more than you know." I carried those words in my pocket for days. Jonah would wait for me outside sometimes, leaning against his car with a thermos of tea. We'd drive nowhere, talk about everything. His world of rhythm and sound. Mine of pulse rates and case studies. Somehow they fit. One night, as we watched the city lights from a hilltop, he reached over and took my hand, no fanfare, no hesitation. "I hope you know," he said quietly, "you're allowed to be proud of yourself now." I squeezed his hand back. "I am," I said, surprised to realize it was true. "For the first time in my life, I actually am." There's a rhythm to the hospital. Not the chaos you'd expect. Not just the alarms and the calls and the code blues, but something deeper. Like the place has a heartbeat of its own. Once I stopped panicking every time someone called my name, I started to hear it. And I started to feel like I belonged inside it. 3 weeks into my internship at Mercy General, I'd memorized the names of most of the nurses on my floor, could anticipate Dr. Patel's coffee order, and knew exactly where the crash cart lived in the ICU hallway. I still wasn't sleeping much, but something about the exhaustion now felt earned. Sacred, even. My favorite part of the day was the early mornings, when the halls were still quiet and the world hadn't yet decided whether to be kind or cruel. I'd sip weak coffee from the residents' lounge and review vitals, mentally preparing for rounds. It was during one of those early shifts that I met Mr. Alvarez. 84, chronic arrhythmia, frequent flyer to the cardiac unit. He greeted me the first day by tapping his chest and grinning. "Still ticking, just off beat." I laughed. "That makes 2 of us." He liked me immediately. Said I reminded him of his granddaughter, but with more sarcasm and better posture. I started sitting with him after rounds, asking him about his old radio repair shop, his late wife, the way he'd always been able to fix everything, except, as he joked, his own faulty ticker. One afternoon, as I adjusted his blanket and checked his chart, he looked at me and said, "You have the hands of a cardiologist." I blinked. "Is that a real thing?" "Sure it is," he replied, closing his eyes with a satisfied sigh. "You touch hearts like you already understand them." The words stayed with me all day. That night I couldn't stop thinking about the heart, not in the poetic way, but in the practical, mechanical, miraculous way it kept us alive. How fragile and fierce it could be. How it gave us away before our words ever did. When I mentioned it to Jonah, he smiled and said, "Sounds like you found your rhythm." And he was right. I started shadowing the cardiac team more often, slipping into consults whenever I could, listening to stories about valve replacements, congenital defects, emergency surgeries performed in the nick of time. I became obsessed with murmurs, with echocardiograms, with learning how to hear what most people missed. One day I joked with a patient as I listened to her chest, "Your pulse says more than your words ever could." She chuckled, but her eyes softened. Then I hope mine saying thank you. Even the other interns started to notice. One of them, Daniel, a tall, slightly too cocky second year, pulled me aside in the elevator. "You're not just trying to get through this," he said. "You actually love it." I shrugged, suddenly shy. "Don't you?" He grinned. "I like being right. You look like you want to understand." I wasn't sure if it was a compliment or a warning. Maybe both. Still, every time I walked through those double doors, stethoscope around my neck, I felt a sense of purpose. Like I was stitching a future together with every step. At home, Jonah would greet me with music, sometimes something soft on his guitar, sometimes just a humming melody he'd built out of the hospital cafeteria noises I'd described the night before. "You look tired," he said one night as I dropped onto the couch and buried my face in his shoulder. "I am," I murmured, "but the good kind." He stroked my hair and whispered, "Then you're exactly where you're meant to be." It was raining hard the afternoon everything changed. The kind of rain that blurs the windows, drips steadily from coat hems, and makes everyone in the ER a little more frayed than usual. I'd been on my feet for 9 hours, running labs, checking vitals, helping with intake paperwork. I was halfway through logging a patient chart when the ambulance doors burst open. "Male, 20s, unresponsive on arrival," the EMT called out, wheeling in a gurney. "Nonverbal, vitals unstable, gasping, possible cardiac distress." I glanced up from the computer, heart stuttering. The young man on the stretcher was wide-eyed, thrashing weakly, lips tinged blue. His hands were moving fast, gesturing, signing in frantic bursts, but no one around him seemed to understand. Nurses shouted vitals. A doctor began shouting orders. Someone tried to strap his arms down. The man flailed harder. And then I saw it. Not panic, communication. His hands weren't flailing, they were signing. Precise, practiced movements from someone desperately trying to be heard. I stepped closer, blood roaring in my ears. "I think he's signing," I said, raising my voice over the chaos. "He's trying to tell us something." No one stopped, so I stepped directly into the doctor's path. "He's deaf," I said, louder now. "He's not panicking, he's communicating." Dr. Benson, gruff and gray-bearded, gave me a look. "You read ASL?" "Enough." I turned to the patient and knelt beside the gurney, hands up so he could see me. His eyes locked onto mine. "Slow down," I signed. "What's wrong?" He pointed at his chest. Then signed rapidly, "Heart defect meds in bag." "Heart defect," I called. "He's saying his medication is in his bag." "Check it," Dr. Benson barked. A nurse ripped open the canvas backpack. Inside, amid a phone, notebook, and headphones, was a small orange bottle, nitroglycerin. "Got it!" the nurse shouted. Seconds later, the medication was administered. The young man's breathing slowed. His chest stopped rising and falling in frantic jerks. His hands stilled, resting lightly on the blanket. I sat back on my heels, heart pounding. He looked at me, his eyes glassy but steady. Then signed softly, "Thank you." I smiled, tears suddenly burning at the corners of my eyes. "You're safe now." The room exhaled as one. Dr. Benson gave a slow, approving nod. "Good catch, Thompson," he said. "You just saved his life." Later, I sat alone in the locker room, still shaking. My soaked scrubs clung to my back, my shoes squished with every step, and I couldn't stop replaying those few minutes over and over in my mind. I had recognized something no one else had. I had made the call. I had done something. That night when I got home, Jonah was sitting on my floor with his guitar, tuning it slowly. He looked up the moment I walked in. "You're late," he said gently. "Everything okay?" I didn't answer right away. I dropped my bag, peeled off my coat, and sank down beside him. Then I told him everything. The ambulance, the signs, the panic, the stillness that came after. He listened without interrupting. When I finally stopped talking, he reached for my hand. "You didn't just interpret," he said softly. "You saw him, that matters." I nodded, eyes stinging. "I didn't even think, I just reacted." "Sometimes the best kind of doctor doesn't wait for permission," he said. "They listen, and then they act." I rested my head against his shoulder and whispered. It felt right, like I was supposed to be there in that exact moment. "You were," he said. We sat there in silence for a long while, the storm still tapping against the windows, the room dim and warm. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a student trying to become someone. I felt like someone who already was. 3 days after the ER incident, I was still buzzing. Not in the way people usually mean after a win. This was something quieter, more internal, like my body hadn't caught up with the weight of what had happened. I went to class. I took notes. I restocked IV trays during my shifts, but everything felt slightly brighter. I'd saved someone's life. It hadn't been a fantasy or a classroom simulation. It was real, and no one could take it from me. What I didn't expect was how fast the world would find out. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon, and I was curled up on the floor of my apartment reviewing cardiac arrhythmias when there was a knock at the door. I assumed it was Jonah, but when I opened it, I froze. 2 sharply dressed men in suits stood on either side of a tall, lean man in his 30s. Expensive coat, silver watch, impossibly calm expression. The man stepped forward and offered his hand. "Claire Thompson?" "Yes," I said slowly, glancing between the 3 of them. "My name is Victor Chen," he said. "You saved my father's life." The breath left my body like I'd been punched in the stomach. "Mr. Chen," I whispered, trying to steady myself. "Your father, the patient from the ER," he nodded. "His name is Wei Chen. He's deaf, born with a congenital heart defect. He taught himself sign language at 15, said it was the only way to really speak." My throat tightened. "He's okay?" I asked. Victor smiled. "Thanks to you, yes, he's recovering well. But that's not why I'm here." One of the men handed me an envelope. "I want to personally thank you," Victor said. "Not just for acting quickly, but for seeing him, for treating him like a person instead of a case." I opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a check for $100,000. My knees buckled. I barely managed to lower myself onto the edge of the couch. I can't take this," I said, breathless. "This is too much." "It's not charity," he said. "It's a grant for your education, or your research, or whatever dream you've put on hold for survival." Tears welled up before I could stop them. "I was just doing my job," I whispered. "You did more than that," he said gently. "My father wants the world to know." I shook my head, panicked. "No, I don't want attention. I don't need." "There's a news crew on the way," he said, "but only if you're okay with it. My father gave me one instruction: don't pressure her. Just ask." I sat frozen, the envelope still clutched in my hand. I thought about my father, how he said choosing medicine would disgrace our family name, how he told me I'd regret walking away from the firm. What would he say now if he saw me on TV? The next morning, the segment aired. Local news. A short piece. A camera crew had followed Victor and me back to Mercy, where I showed them the ER doors and tried not to stumble over my words. The anchor called me a rising star in cardiology. I barely recognized the girl on the screen, eyes wide, coat too big, hair pulled into a tired ponytail, but she was smiling. When the story ended, Jonah muted the TV. I turned to him, suddenly self-conscious. "Was I weird?" He gave me a crooked grin. "A little," I groaned. "Great." He leaned in and kissed my forehead. "You were honest. That's better than polished." Later that night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. My phone was blowing up with messages, from classmates, professors, even people from high school I hadn't heard from in years. A few emails had subject lines like partnership opportunities and let's discuss your future. It was surreal. I should have been thrilled, but something in me was quiet, almost wary. I wasn't used to being seen like this, and part of me was terrified that if the world looked too closely, they'd realize I didn't belong. "You okay?" Jonah asked, sliding into bed beside me. I nodded, but the truth sat heavy in my chest. "I don't know how to be this person," I admitted. "The one everyone's watching." He reached over and traced my knuckles with his thumb. "You don't have to be anyone," he said. "Just keep doing what you've always done. Listen, help, trust yourself." I rested my head against him and tried to believe it. But deep down, I knew what this moment meant. I wasn't invisible anymore, and soon the person who'd once tried to erase me from his life was going to see exactly who I'd become. The dress was navy blue, tailored but simple, with capped sleeves and a high neckline, professional but not stiff. I tried it on 3 times in front of my mirror before I finally let myself breathe. It wasn't about vanity, it was armor. I hadn't seen my father in over a year, not since that night in the kitchen, the one with the slammed fists and the threats and the locked bedroom door. Since then, I'd built a life, brick by brick, studying, working, surviving. Now thriving, and I was going back, not to ask for anything, but to show him. The invitation to his 60th birthday came in a cream-colored envelope with gold lettering. My mother had sent it with no personal note, just the date, the time, and the address of their new house in the suburbs. Bigger than the last one, somehow colder. At first, I almost threw it away, but something in me, something stubborn and unfinished, said go. So I did. The drive out to the estate was quiet. Jonah offered to come, but I told him no. This part I had to do alone. I needed to walk through those doors and feel everything I'd avoided for months. I bought a gift. A leather-bound textbook on cardiac surgery, sleek, expensive, with gold-embossed letters. I wrapped it myself and added a handwritten note. "I found my pulse. Maybe one day you'll see the rhythm in it too. Claire." It wasn't sentimental, but it was honest. As I pulled into the circular driveway, the first thing I noticed was how little had changed. Same manicured hedges. Same stone lion statues flanking the front steps, guarding the house like they owned it. I paused on the porch, smoothed the front of my dress, and knocked. The door opened almost immediately. It was my mother. Her face looked tired, beautiful but brittle. "Claire," she said with a small, hesitant smile. "You came." "I wasn't sure I would," I replied. She stepped aside and I walked in. The house was full of laughter, glasses clinking, background music humming under polite conversation. Everyone was dressed like they were trying to win a subtle contest. Lawyers, clients, cousins I hadn't seen in years. I felt like I was walking into a museum exhibit, the life Claire was supposed to have. And then I saw him, my father, Gerald Thompson, 60 years old, still commanding the room in a charcoal suit. His hair more silver now, but his posture still razor-sharp. He turned as someone tapped his shoulder and said something I couldn't hear. Then his eyes landed on me. For a brief moment, his face went blank. Then he smiled, polite, restrained, like I was a client, not his daughter. "Well," he said, stepping forward. "A doctor, huh?" I returned the smile with equal precision. "In progress. I hope you brought a stethoscope, not stories." There it was, the jab, the dismissal wrapped in civility. I handed him the gift. He looked at it without opening it, nodding like he didn't quite know what to do. We made small talk. He asked about that hospital I'd been making the rounds at. I told him I'd recently been assigned to Mercy's cardiac unit. He raised his eyebrows, surprised, but didn't say more. Guests milled around us, sipping champagne and pretending not to watch. I spotted Uncle Brad by the fireplace, Aunt Valerie near the drinks table. Names I remembered, faces I hadn't missed. The air felt tight. Like everyone was waiting for something to happen, like I was a spark near a room full of kindling. My mother led me to the dining room, a long mahogany table with place cards and flickering candles. I took a seat near the middle, surrounded by perfectly arranged cutlery and practiced smiles. The toast began. People stood and gave short, rehearsed speeches about success, legacy, years of service. No one mentioned kindness or love. Then dessert arrived, and with it something else, a gasp. From the other side of the table, Uncle Brad blinked at the television mounted above the fireplace. "Isn't that Claire?" Everyone turned. The news was on mute, but the video played anyway. A clip from the hospital segment. Me in my white coat, hair tied back, explaining sign language with my hands. The headline read, "Young intern saves tech giant's life with silent language." The room froze. My fork hovered in midair. My father's face went pale. No one spoke. And just like that, the balance shifted. The silence that followed Uncle Brad's exclamation stretched like a live wire across the table. Everyone turned toward the TV. The muted footage rolled on me in scrubs, my name spelled out in bold white letters across the bottom. The anchor's expression was reverent. The overlay read, "Med student hero, Claire Thompson saves billionaire with sign language." My father's chair creaked as he shifted, his face frozen in a half-smile that didn't know where to land. A flicker of red crept up his neck. Across the table, someone whispered, "That's Gerald's daughter." Another guest, more brazen, added, "Didn't she walk out on the firm?" I didn't speak, I didn't move, I let the room absorb it. For the first time in my life, I didn't shrink. Then my father coughed. Once, twice. It didn't sound like nerves. It sounded like something was wrong. He reached for his water, missed the glass, and knocked it sideways. The ice spilled across the tablecloth. "Dad," I said cautiously, standing. He raised a hand as if to wave me off, but then his face twisted. His jaw clenched. He gasped. Then, without warning, he stood and staggered back, bumping into his chair. His hand flew to his throat. His eyes bulged. The room exploded into chaos. "Oh my God, he's choking." "Someone help," Aunt Valerie screamed. Brad knocked over a wine glass. My mother rushed to his side, hands flailing uselessly. And I moved. All the noise fell away. I pushed past a chair, grabbed my father by the shoulders, and spun him around. His body was rigid. Air whistled in desperate, useless bursts. His hand clawed at his chest. "I've got you," I whispered, stepping behind him. I placed a fist just below his ribcage and gripped it with my other hand. Then I pulled. One thrust. Two. The room was dead silent now. I could hear his struggling breath, my own heart pounding. 3. 4. On the fifth, something small and sharp shot from his mouth, a piece of steak glistening with wine sauce. He buckled in my arms. I caught him, easing him into his chair. He gasped for air, eyes wide and watery, his whole chest rising in spasms. I knelt in front of him, one hand still braced on his arm. He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. "You," he rasped. "You saved my life," I nodded, suddenly trembling. "I wasn't going to let you die hating me." He closed his eyes, the tears slipping out before he could stop them. "I was wrong," he whispered, "about all of it." Everyone in the room was staring, silent, stunned, breathless. I didn't care. I looked at my father, really looked. His pride had always been louder than his love. But now, for the first time, I saw something else in his eyes. Humility, fear, gratitude. He reached out, his hand trembling, and covered mine. "I'm proud of you, Claire," he said. "I don't know how to say it better." I swallowed hard, my vision blurring. "Now you know why I chose medicine," I whispered. He nodded. And the room exhaled. The guests left quietly. There were no more toasts, no more music, just murmurs and handshakes and the click of expensive shoes down the marble hallway as the last of them slipped into the night. I stayed behind. My mother offered to make tea, then disappeared into the kitchen, leaving the two of us alone in the great room, where the fire in the stone hearth still glowed low and steady. My father sat in the armchair, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. I took the seat across from him, folding my hands in my lap. The silence between us stretched, not cold this time, but waiting. He cleared his throat. "So, cardiology." I gave a soft smile. "That's the plan." "I should have guessed," he muttered, glancing at the leather-bound book I'd given him earlier. He'd finally opened it and placed it on the side table next to an untouched glass of scotch. "I remember your grandmother's heart condition," he added after a pause. "You used to hover by her bedside like a tiny nurse." "She called me her shadow," I said. "Said I asked better questions than most of her doctors." "She was proud of you." I looked at him then, really looked. His shoulders had dropped, his expression unguarded in a way that unsettled me. He looked tired. "I didn't want to disappoint you," I said, quieter now. "I just didn't want to become you." He gave a sharp exhale, half laugh, half sigh. "I know," he said. "I just didn't know how to be proud of something I didn't understand. When you walked away from law, I thought you were walking away from us." I wasn't, I said, but I had to walk toward something. I needed to build a life I could live with. He looked into the fire, his voice low. I thought I knew what strength looked like. I thought control meant safety. I swallowed. You used your strength to silence people. He nodded slowly, the shame flickering across his features like a ghost. And you used yours to listen, to save. He stood slowly and walked toward the bookshelf behind his desk. After a moment of rifling through a drawer, he returned with something I hadn't seen in years, the old law firm brochure, the one with his picture on the back and the headline that once haunted me, "Legacy You Can Trust." He held it out to me. "Do with it what you will," he said. "Frame it, burn it, leave it in the past." I took it from him gently, my fingers brushing the embossed letters. "I think I'll frame it," I said, "not to honor the firm, but to remember where I came from." He gave a small smile. "A reminder of the road not taken." "A reminder," I echoed, "that I didn't take it and I survived anyway." We sat in silence for a while, letting the fire crackle and the moment breathe. Eventually, he asked, "Do you hate me, Claire?" I looked down at the brochure, then back at him. "No," I said. "But I needed to stop needing you to approve of me." He closed his eyes for a moment, then nodded. "That's fair." We didn't hug, we didn't cry, but when I stood to leave, he walked me to the door and opened it with steady hands. "You're always welcome here," he said, "if you ever want to be." I looked back at him, silhouetted in the soft porch light. "I'll come back," I said, "when I have something worth sharing." "You already have." This time, the silence between us didn't ache. It settled. Like peace. 2 years later, the sun came up on the day I opened my clinic. I arrived early, before the cameras, before the ribbon cutting, before the crowd began to gather in the lobby. The building was still quiet, the light outside golden and soft, the air carrying that fragile hush that only exists at the start of something real. I walked the halls alone, room by room, exam table by exam table. Every space was clean, simple, and filled with intention. One corner of the reception area had a stack of colorful heart-shaped pamphlets in both English and ASL. "Your Heart, Your Voice" was the name of the program we'd built with Victor Chen's foundation. Free cardiovascular screenings and health education for deaf and hard-of-hearing children across San Antonio. The walls weren't covered in diplomas or donor names. Instead, we'd hung murals, bright, vibrant pieces made by kids from the boarding school where I once worked. One painting showed a giant red heart made entirely of tiny, outstretched hands. I paused in front of it, overwhelmed. This was what it looked like when a dream came to life. Victor arrived just before 10, dapper as ever, calm as always. He handed me a single rose and smiled. "My father sends his love," he said. "Said to tell you he's doing laps around the garden like he's training for a marathon." "I'll take that as a good sign." Victor nodded toward the press setting up by the front doors. "You ready for your moment?" "I've had too many moments lately," I said. "This one isn't for me." "Then who's it for?" I turned toward the large windows. Outside, I spotted the school bus pulling up. The kids were here. Dozens of them all signing excitedly as they stepped off, some with hearing aids, others with interpreters by their side. Their energy hit the sidewalk like sunlight. That's who it was for. Them. At 10:15, the ribbon was cut. There was applause, hand waves, camera shutters. And then, unexpectedly, my father arrived. He stepped through the glass doors in a tailored navy suit, walking slowly but deliberately, his silver hair combed back. For a moment, I thought maybe he'd just come quietly to observe. But then he walked up to the podium, tapped gently on the mic, and asked for the reporter's attention. "I'm Gerald Thompson," he began. "I'm not a doctor, I'm not a philanthropist, I'm just a father." A beat passed. He glanced at me. "And 2 years ago," he continued, "I told my daughter that following her dream would be a disgrace to our family." Whispers rippled through the crowd. He raised his hand. "I was wrong." He turned toward me, voice steady now. "Turns out the heart knows best." He stepped aside as I approached the mic. My hands didn't shake this time. "Thank you," I said softly. "This clinic was built to listen to voices people often ignore, voices like mine, like yours." I looked at the children. "And sometimes justice doesn't look like revenge. Sometimes it just looks like being seen." The applause rose slowly, then all at once. The children beamed. Jonah, standing in the back, raised his hands and signed, "Proud of you." I signed back, "Thank you for hearing me." As the ceremony ended and guests mingled, my father stepped up beside me. He didn't say much, but when the cameras turned our way, he did something that surprised me. He hugged me, gently, firmly, like he meant it. The picture ran on the front page of the local paper the next morning. Doctor of Hearts, Claire Thompson changes lives with one silent word at a time. In the photo, I'm holding a stethoscope. My father's hand rests on my shoulder. The mural of hands is behind us, glowing. But my favorite part of the picture is what no one else noticed. I'm not looking at the camera. I'm looking at the children, and I'm smiling.